You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Archaeotech Podcast, episode 76. Your hosts today are Chris Webster and Paul Zimmerman. On today's episode, Chris and Paul answer your tech questions. Let's get to it.
All right, welcome to episode 76 of the Archaeotech Podcast. As I said in the introduction, we have a listener sort of feedback episode that we just created in the last few hours. How's it going, Paul?
It's going great. We're on spring break and I'm relaxing for a change. How you doing?
I am not on spring break. I don't even know when that happens or what it means, since I'm not a student or have children. So I'm not relaxing, but I'm doing great. I've got an awesome conference coming up this weekend. The Nevada Archaeological Association. It's a really small local affair. I don't think I'm going to be able to do any recording. There's not even an exhibition hall. I'm the only exhibitor because I know the president. So I'm going to be in the hallway with like a thing. But I'll have a wild note booth up there. But aside from that, after that, I'm going to the Northwest Anthropological Conference in Boise, Idaho. And there, I hope to actually do some recording for several of the podcasts. Hopefully, I can get some Archaeotech stuff in there. But again, this is a really small conference, so we'll see. We'll see. If you're at either of these conferences, actually, the NAA will have been passed by the time you're hearing this, so forget that one. But if you're at NWAC, then let me know. Hit me up, and we'll chat. Or if you see me, if you missed that, the next conference after that is the SAA is in Washington, DC. And I'm going to have full recording capabilities, 6-track recording capabilities, and beverages in my hotel room studio at the conference hotel. So definitely find me there. Okay, well, this morning, we've got a whole list of topics that we want to talk about, but they're not always completely fleshed out. So when it comes up to a recording time, we're like, let's talk about this. However, we thought, this morning, let's just put out a call on social media and see if our audience, see if anybody that we know actually has any good tech questions, because this podcast is really designed to help you out, the listener. And the best way we can do that is to directly answer your questions. Now, I'll say right off the bat here, Paul and I have certain skill sets, but we may not know the answers to all these questions, but we can probably speak for a little while about all of them and really, maybe kind of dive into a little bit. But if you are an expert in one of the areas we're about to talk about and you want to come on the show and we can dedicate a show to that topic, that would be fantastic. You can contact me at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. I'm on Twitter at ArchaeoWebby, ARCHEO Webby, and Paul is at Lugal.com. So not Lugal.com. That's not a website. At Lugal on Twitter.
Actually, that's my website too.
Well, there you go. Find Paul there.
Well, there's not a whole lot there. There's a picture.
Nice. Okay, so let's just get to the first question. And these are in no particular order. They're just in the order that I copied and pasted them from Facebook. I posted in the Archaeo Field Techs group in case you're on Facebook and want to go engage with these. Archaeo Field Techs, the CRM Project Managers group, and then just on the APN Facebook page, facebook.com/arcpodnet. Okay. So the first question, and we're just going to use first names here because I also didn't get permission to talk about anybody's names. Some of these are in closed groups. So we'll just use first names, and I think that'll be okay. So James asks, is there a benefit using drone-mounted LiDAR as opposed to LiDAR survey using fixed-wing aircraft? And then it's kind of separate question, difference in image resolution. Well, I think the first question is actually really easy. Drone-mounted LiDAR is going to be one hell of a bit cheaper than fixed-wing aircraft because fixed-wing aircraft are actual aircraft. They're bigger. They have different requirements. You need to be a licensed pilot. You need to hire somebody. The aircraft needs to be fitted with the LiDAR. I mean, you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars setup cost just to have one of these. And I don't know what they charge by the hour, but for probably what it costs to do a day's worth of LiDAR work with a fixed-wing aircraft, you could buy a fancy drone and a LiDAR unit and get all your stuff done and then own the equipment and then keep on trucking. So, Paul, I don't know if you have any insight on
Yeah, I thought this was an interesting question because I thought, my experience with LiDAR so far, and I've never used it firsthand, but what I know of it, it's big equipment that basically has to go on fixed-wing aircraft. I'm not surprised that there's LiDAR available for drones, but it's not something I'd looked into before. It was the question for me was, hey, is LiDAR better on fixed-wing aircraft, or is the imaginary LiDAR that we haven't invented yet going to be better on drones? I guess I'm probably a little behind the ball here. What is LiDAR like on drones? Have you used it? Have you seen
I haven't personally used it, but I have seen it, and I know I'm going to go to their website right now. Archaearial, ARCHAERIAL.com. We'll have that in the show notes. They are doing a lot of really high end stuff, and let's see if they specifically list that, because I know they were selling their drones. Like, they make drones that you can sell or that you can buy, but they also have services where they will just run everything, because I think they realize that, hey, people don't know how to do this, so we need to do it for them. Let's see, they've got a bunch of things here. Also, while I'm looking this up, I'm part of a few drone users groups here in Reno. And Nevada, as some people may know, was determined several years ago, to be one of the, quote, test sites, like national test sites, like the entire state. I think there's 7 of them or something like that, where essentially drone regulation is just a little bit looser, and you can do stuff because we have wide open spaces, and you can get permits in a little easier way to actually get some stuff done. Because of that, the University of Nevada, Reno here has a pretty extensive drone program, and they're doing a lot of stuff. And I've been a part of a few of the things related to that. And there's a company here in town, I think they're called Above Geo now, or something like that. And they do a lot of drone work, and they do LiDAR. So they're hanging LiDAR off of not only fixed wing remote aircraft, fixed wing remote controlled aircraft, but also drones, of course. LiDAR is really heavy, from what I understand. So, I mean, it's not a small piece of equipment. So putting it on a fixed wing, even a remote control fixed wing aircraft, means you can't use some of the really light ones. A lot of the fixed wing drones are like styrofoam. I mean, they're really lightweight, so it'd be really difficult to put that on there. So you need the lifting capabilities of like a Hexa or Octocopter, and yes, that's 6 or 8 rotors, to be able to hang the LiDAR unit off of there and then do that. Now, the other thing that I know just of drones is drones are going to have limited range and speed and capabilities and stuff like that compared to a fixed wing aircraft. So one of your advantages to a fixed wing aircraft might just be speed. I mean, this aircraft can fly over at 150 plus miles per hour, and just, I don't know what the speed requirements for LiDAR to actually work, but it's light detection and ranging. So I'm guessing it probably travels at the speed of light. So that's pretty quick, which means you can be moving pretty quick and not lose a lot of resolution in that. So I'm guessing the fixed wing aircraft, they're traveling at least 100 miles per hour, because otherwise they drop out of the sky, and just cruising back and forth across the landscape. Now, there isn't a drone on the planet that's carrying LiDAR at those speeds. I mean, they're probably doing it at 15 or 20 miles per hour at best, but probably even slower than that. So you've got to take that into account when you're looking at your costs. Do you have the ability to be there longer, and therefore you can do a drone survey? And can you get your equipment into the country if you're not doing it in the United States, or you're in some other country and you're coming to somewhere, wherever the case may be? Or can you hire somebody locally to do it in like 2 hours, what would take you a week to do? So you got to factor that into your costs as well. Do you even want to own the equipment? Do you want to learn how to operate the equipment? Stuff like that. So there's a lot of factors in it. As far as to answer your question, Paul, in the longest way I possibly can, yes, there is drone LiDAR. You just got to look at it on a case-by-case basis, whether or not it's going to be beneficial for you. If you're doing it a lot, you should probably own your own equipment. That being said, experts out there can probably do what you can do better in a shorter period of time, even if they're using fixed-wing aircraft.
Well, I've got an idea here, again, not from ever having done LiDAR, but I would expect that fixed-wing aircraft, you can bring a bigger LiDAR unit, and you can then shoot more lasers down at the ground and get a better detailed or cover a wider range in a shorter amount of time than you would be able to with the drone. LiDAR, for those that don't know, it's almost like X-ray imaging for landscapes, so it's been used with great success. And maybe you've seen over the last month, there's been all over the news, archaeological news, about a LiDAR project in Guatemala, I believe. Maya one that found all sorts of evidence for urban planning and massive extent of archaeological sites beyond what was previously thought to exist, and that was done because LiDAR can then cover such a big area and works really nicely. That those lasers, some of the bounce back off of the canopy of the forest, while others find a little hole and bounce off off the ground surface or off of architecture, whatever's down there on the ground level, and so then the software can then strip out that upper level of noise if you don't want to look at the canopy and look down then at what's on the surface. I think the more lasers you can fire down at the ground from on high, the better detail, the more likely you're going to have ones that make it through that canopy and down to the ground. And then that brings up the other question. If you're using it in a jungle environment, it might be extremely difficult to fly your drones, right? You might not want to have line of sight to your drone. And if something goes wrong, it's going to be stuck 100 feet up a tree instead of down to the ground level. So I think if you're looking at using it in a jungle environment, that you'd be much better served with fixed wing for the time being, at least until you have some drone that can fly automated.
Yeah, and most of those will do that. But again, while other countries might not require line of sight like the United States does, it's still a good idea if you're in an unfamiliar location. I mean, you could launch a drone from the middle of the jungle and send it up and pre-program in a route for it and have it just run that route. And if you know there's not very many obstructions, or you can get to the drone if you need to, because most of these, like mine, and I mean, I don't have a high-end commercial one. I mean, it's fairly high-end, but it's not like the Hexa, the $10,000 drones. It's just like the $5,000 drone. And but that's a pretty big difference in commercial drone technology. But anyway, with mine, I've got an app right on my tablet that I can just create a flight path for it, send it up in the air, and have it do its thing, and it will come back and land or hover, whatever the case may be, and then come back to me. Now, also, nearly all of these drones have GPS on board, and this thing, even if I don't have like a cell service signal or something like that, that's giving me real-time maps, on the little map that I have on my screen, I can actually see where the drone is. It's still responding back to with its GPS coordinates. It's just not showing me a map. So if it did go down, I'd be able to actually find it to within a pretty close accuracy, at least where it roughly went down, unless the GPS fails. So all these things are possible, but like you said, Paul, it comes down to, do you want to even, deal with it in a jungle situation? Do you even want to hassle with it, or do you just want to call it in military style, send in the LiDAR bird and go that way? So I don't know. I'm also linking real quick to a Drone Zone, really good forum for drone stuff. Drone Zone article on the top 10 LiDAR sensors for drones. So check those out. See what you think.
Looking at this LiDAR, the news release that happened last month about the sites in Guatemala, I'm kind of interested in this because one of the principals on the project is Marcello Canuto, who went to school with me at Penn, and he also grew up right in the same neighborhood as my wife, so they've known each other since they were children. So maybe I'll get in touch with him, reach out to him, see if we can get him on this podcast, or maybe I'd suggested to you earlier, it might make sense also to have him over on the Archaeology show, but to see what he can say about it. But I was looking at various articles quickly to jog my memory before we start recording, and NPR has one, Game Changer, Maya Cities Unearthed in Guatemala Forest Using Lasers. And I just want to pull this one quote out here, because this is, I think, a distinct advantage then in this case of using fixed-wing aircraft versus a drone. The quote is, LiDAR allows scientists to accomplish years or even decades worth of mapping in a single afternoon.
Oh my God.
For example, Garrison says he was part of a team that worked for some 8 years to map less than a square mile at the site called El Zots. The plane using LiDAR took data for 67 square miles in a matter of hours.
Oh, Jesus. Yeah.
So again, this is a big project, and they were well funded and well planned and well executed, apparently. But the fixed wing aircraft can cover 67 square miles in a matter of hours. You're not going to be able to get your drone up that long.
Yeah.
In a matter of hours, right? You're not going to be able to cover that much area.
No, you'd have a backpack full of batteries just to do that. So, and when you start adding these relatively heavy sensors, I mean, they're getting smaller, but you start adding these sensors on there, and your battery time just starts to decrease even more. This one of these things I clicked into, and it doesn't say what kind of drones you can actually fit on, so you'd have to look at that. But just to give you an idea on price, there are LiDAR sensor kits here on this article, ranging from just $115 up to about $1,000, depending on how many sensors you're actually using, which what I'm noticing here is determining your your detection range. A lot of these detection range are less than 300 to 400 feet, somewhere around 700 feet, which means that's the distance that you can be from the objects that you're using LiDAR on. Whereas a fixed wing aircraft can be higher because they've got a massive sensor on there that's just sending out this huge pulse. And then also the number of segments apparently, and the number of sensors that it's got on the return is really determining the cost here, which really is just determining how this goes back to the question from James is difference in image resolution. Well, it sounds like, James, your difference in image resolution really just depends on the sensor itself. I'm going to say probably that if you're using fixed wing LiDAR, like an actual piloted fixed wing aircraft, the image resolution is probably top notch. It's probably the highest you're going to get because nobody's going to outfit a plane with a shitty LiDAR sensor. I mean, that just doesn't sound very cost effective. However, with drones, you're really going to have to pay attention to the limitations of the sensor, what you pay for the sensor, and the image resolution you're going to get from that sensor. It's all going to be contingent upon what the person spent. So if you hire a LiDAR crew that's bringing drones down, ask about their sensors. What kind of resolution are they getting? How much can they cover per acre, per battery, or per hour, or whatever the case may be? Because the speed that they fly at and the image resolution coming back is going to be heavily, heavily, heavily determined by the quality of the sensor that they've decided to put on there. And it's already a crowded market. There's probably hundreds of different variations out there that you can get for LiDAR. There isn't just like one or two. So be very careful. And probably ask for some sample data before you send somebody out there to do that. And, make sure they tell you what parameters the sample data was taken at, would be my guess, and go from there. So we got any more on LiDAR?
No, that's well more than I already knew about it. So
me too, actually. That's what I love about this podcast. It actually gets us learning things too. And then we can take what we learned and send it out to the thousands of people that listen to this. So
it was a lot of fun, that.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're pretty close to a break, so let's just do that, and we'll come back on the other side. In the meantime, go to arcpodnet.com/members to support us and bring more awesome content like this to your ears and get a little bit of swag and extras in the process. All right. Back in a second.
This network is supported by our listeners. You can become a supporting member by going to arcpodnet.com/members and signing up. As a supporting member, you have access to high-quality downloads of each show and a discount at our future online store, and access to show hosts on a members-only Slack team. For professional members, we'll have training shows and other special content offered throughout the year. Once again, go to arcpodnet.com/members to support the network and get some great extras and swag in the process. That's arcpodnet.com/members.
All right, we are back with episode 76 with your technology questions. And again, if you want to add to this for the next time we do this, just send an email. Contact info is in the show notes at arcpodnet.com/archaeotech. And for this episode, /76, check that out. But anyway, let's move right along. And you can always, we got most of these off of Facebook. In fact, we got all these off of Facebook because we asked for them, but always feel free to send us a message over there on the ArcPodNet Facebook page and send us your questions. So, okay, this next one is from Adam, again from Facebook. And this is an interesting question, not really a technology question, but I wanted to tackle it anyway. We'll spend a few minutes on it. How do our own biases influence the way we describe technology in prehistory? Now, that's a really interesting question because technology in prehistory is usually like lithic technology, stone tools and fiber arts technology and the other things that we find in the prehistoric record that were, I guess, technology for its time. But most people these days think of technology as something with a battery. So something electronic. Paul, do you got any thoughts on this?
Again, it is much broader than technology. I think that it goes really to how we interpret archaeological data in general. I mean, the first thing that I thought of is not particularly technical, but because last week, or on the last episode rather, we were talking about drawing, and one of the advantages of drawing versus a more purely mechanical method of recording is that it does allow the archaeologist to interpret and illustrate what they're interpreting, right? And that can be good because they can see things that otherwise you might not see in just a straight photograph, but it can also be bad because then it can introduce certain biases. And so what I thought of immediately when I read this, maybe it's because I had Mayan sites on my brain, but I remember some story of an early French explorer in Mesoamerica drawing pictures of murals, and the people had kind of French peasant hats on in his drawings. That's what he was expecting to see. So that's what he drew, which makes sense. And so we see this all along. I mean, there's the joke of, archaeologists, if you don't know what it is, it's a ritual object or it's a spindle whorl, right?
Nice.
We do definitely use whatever language that we have currently available to describe things in the past, and it may be apt, it may not, depending. So I've seen a lot of discussion lately about like network theory, communications networks, and so on, as models, not directly as not directly like saying that people in the past were using computer models and electronic communications, but using the metaphors of the internet, especially to describe things happening in the past. I wish I could think of a specific example of that right now, but I've definitely seen that right now. So I know that that's that the language at least has kind of shifted that way with certain interpretations. Do you have any specifics of how we might describe something using modern technology terms that might be a bias for understanding ancient technologies?
I'm trying to think of specific examples as well. And really, I think the only things that kind of come to mind are like structure construction and things like that. We find, say, pit houses, and we find teepee rings, and we find all kinds of stuff. And, I don't know what sort of modern biases we're placing on these things, because most of us have never constructed something like that. However, we think about how we would construct it, and then we tend to place that bias on the construction methods. Now, sometimes maybe we're right. Maybe there is only one way to make a teepee ring. Maybe there is only one way to make a pit house and to put posts in the ground and to do different things. But maybe there's not. You know what I mean? Maybe the actual method of construction, like let's look at, the easy go-to is obviously the pyramids, or the Rapa Nui, Easter Island moai that we talked about a couple episodes ago. We have no idea how they did those. We speculate. We have some theories, but we have no idea. And a lot of the ways that we're trying to figure out that they did, we're trying to use materials that they would have had at the time and say, well, could it have been this way? Could it have been that way? But the simple fact is, I think we're placing and there's no other way to do it, but we're placing our modern biases on these non-modern technologies. I didn't want to say prehistoric, because in the case of like Egyptians, but either way, I don't think that's almost impossible not to do, because we can't like take that bias away from our brains. The people who were making these things, like the monolith, the massive mound structures, like in the Midwest and things like that in Ohio and around that area, the people that were making these things, they didn't have the modern bias to cloud their judgment on how they were going to construct something. So they just did it the best way they knew how. Maybe it wasn't even the best way. Maybe it was just the way they decided to do it. And they went from there. So it's really difficult for us to actually accurately, I think, determine method of construction and really analyze that, just because we can't take our bias away. It's always going to be there.
Well, the importance then is understanding what the bias is, and that just because you see it in a certain way doesn't mean that that's the only way it can be seen. I was just thinking of one specific use of language, modern language, for describing some ancient technology is with the Antikythera mechanism.
Oh, yeah.
How many times have you seen that described as a computer?
Right.
Yeah. I think a little more accurately, read that in scare quotes if you want, or hear that in scare quotes, is square quotes. I'm not sure what those
square
are.
Quotes. I like square quotes.
Yeah, I think it might be a little more accurate to compare it not to a computer, because then we're thinking of, silicon and digital technology, but to think of it instead of as an adding machine.
Yeah.
Right? Which we had in most offices up until the middle of last century. And that's a purely mechanical device intended to compute things. So it could be considered a computer in some sense. But, I think that's a better analogy for what that Antikythera mechanism is. The problem is nowadays, most people don't know what an adding machine is.
Yeah, true.
Nobody's actually seen one unless they happen to see one in a museum or find one, in a back shelf of a Goodwill store or something.
Right. Yeah. That's a great example too. The Antikythera device or mechanism, whatever you want to call it. It's We are trying to. Now they have done some. What is it like? Was it MRI? Is that the right word? They were doing or CT scan or something like that. Something that dives inside.
I done both. I'm not certain.
Yeah. Trying to recreate this thing, but it's so ridiculously hard because of all the different gears. The thing that really intrigues me about that device, from a technology standpoint, is that wasn't developed or invented like from scratch. There was probably a long lineage of devices leading up to that thing, or at least not maybe devices that did the same thing, but at least the concepts of the gears and the intermeshing and the intertwining of the gears like a watch, really making those things work. There's got to be other things out there. And that's really just the amazing thing to me, is what else is out there? Unless it was some wizard genius that was just like making this stuff and, nobody could replicate it after that, which has happened through time.
Whoever made it was a genius, without a doubt.
I mean,
I remember seeing once years ago, one of those old Ray Harryhausen movies. You remember those stop motion, Sinbad?
Yeah, totally.
Oh, those lovely. And I can't remember which one, but there was somebody had a mechanical bird, if I recall correctly.
Nice.
And I remember seeing that at the time, and I would have been a kid. It would have been in the late 70s, early 80s when I saw this. And at the time I thought, why are they having a robot here? And that totally pulls me out of the time period. Yeah. And I knew that, yes, there aren't these huge monsters and everything, but it really jarred me from actually enjoying that part of the movie. Mm-hmm. And, now 40 years later, I think, well, you know what? They may well have had devices just like that, wind up little robots, for lack of a better term, more apt term.
Right. Yeah, why not?
Machines of some kind of analogous to, I guess, a music box, only more complex.
Yeah, I mean, if there was one of these things back, along, I don't remember what the Antikythera device dates to, but it's pretty old. It's older than we would assume for that sort of technology anyway. And I don't know. I wish to hell that we could go back to that time frame and just let that inventor make him successful and let him keep on going. Because you imagine the world we live in now if we had that kind of technology succeed back then. My God, I don't even know where we'd be. So we'd have our hoverboards. That's for damn sure.
We'd be able to talk instantly with people across a network distributed around the world.
Ooh, that's crazy.
Record our voices and let other people listen to them on their own devices that they carry around and are fully self-contained powered.
This is not the Archaeological Fantasies podcast, Paul. We're not going to.
Oh, wait, sorry. We're not going to go there. Now we've already dealt with drone based LiDAR and other imaginary tech.
Exactly.
We're going to go on to that, right?
That's right. All right. Well, let's move on. The next four questions I've got here, again, no particular order. The order I copied them in. They're all basically related to GIS and mapping. So we might be covering some of these together, but we'll see. The first one from Melissa says, what are the best GIS methods to record transects? And then she says, phone apps, ? So I think really what she's asking, she knows you can use a GPS. She knows you could use a Trimble. I think what she's asking is, what are the best phone apps to basically use for GIS? And when she says record transects, my first question would be, what do you mean record transects? Do you mean desert survey in the West, where you're just like, you want a record of the line that you walked? Because I have had private clients that said, we want your GPS KML file for what you walked, just to prove that you did it. I've had people request that before. So you just basically leave your GPS on and it records the breadcrumb, and you just export that as a KML line file and send it to them. And so maybe that's what she's asking, and I can definitely give some insight to that with some pretty quick stuff. One of the ones that people kind of default to because of the name, because it's from Esri, is ArcGIS Collector. I've actually seen some really good, really detailed transect modeling from the Middle East, where everybody had Collector just running on a tablet in the background, and they were collecting stuff with it. They were collecting information, but they also just had it run at a track basically in the background, and they were recording their position. Now, one of the problems you run into with phones or tablets or anything is if it loses that, it's got a weak GPS antenna to begin with. Even like the high-end devices, it's still a pretty weak GPS antenna. So not only are you dealing with 3 to 5 meter resolution, which is like 9 to 15 feet, or 16 feet, give or take. Not only are you dealing with that low resolution, but you're also dealing with, if you stick it in your backpack and you forgot you were recording a track, or you go into a rock shelter or next to a big rock wall, or under some power lines or something like that, some high tension power lines or something, you could affect that signal. And then you're going to end up with this jagged, line where it was recording your track nice and neatly, and then all of a sudden jumped half a mile over and then came back, and then you keep on going. So that's going to affect your distance. It's going to affect everything. You need to clean that stuff up in post if you're looking for like an accurate distance measurement or something like that. But anyway, ArcGIS collector, or collector, they just call it if you search for that. One that I've used quite a bit is just GPS tracks. I'm not going to
ask you about that.
Yeah. GPS tracks, I've used that quite a bit for lots of different things. Again, they try to pack a lot into that app, so it does crash more than I'd like it to, because they've got it doing too many things, I think. I think they just have it doing way too many things simultaneously, and it tends to fail. If you've got an updating satellite map in the background that you've cached, and then you're also recording a track, and you're also trying to drop pins, and you're doing all these things, probably not going to have a lot of success with it. But if you just need to do like the one thing, then GPS tracks is a pretty good one. And then the final one I'll mention, just because I have used it before, is Avenza Maps. I think I've talked about that before. It's also got another name, I think. But if you type in Avenza, you'll find it. It's basically kind of a rudimentary app for doing this. You can put maps in the background. You can download maps that you pay for from their library. You can put your own maps in there. One of the cool ways that I used Avenza was I dropped in some georeferenced historic maps of this military base I was working on, and we were trying to find the historic roads. Like, there's tons of roads out there. We were trying to figure out which ones were the old ones, and because we needed to drive those and then identify the character of those roads. Well, I georeferenced one in the GIS to a modern map, and then dropped that georeferenced map into Avenza Maps, and then had it sitting on a holder, as an iPad mini on a holder on the dash of my truck. And we were basically, it was so weird watching our dot drive on this like 100-year-old map. As we're out there on the landscape and go, oh my God, we're right on that road. Like, this is very accurately drawn. And
I've used that same program for going off-roading in Vermont on Class 4 roads.
Yeah.
Where you can download from the state, you can get the list and and maps of some of their Class 4 roads and just layer it in there. And so that's really nice, because that's data that wouldn't be in any other map.
Yeah. And I remembered Avenza PDF Maps is what they typically call it. Yeah, I'm going to put all this stuff in the show notes too. I'm actually doing that right now. So check the show notes. You don't need to be like write this stuff down. We'll have the links in there. Our awesome show poster, the man in the hat, and I'm not going to use his name because he doesn't like that, but go find the man in the hat. He's going to put that up for us. Anyway. Yeah, I think that's about all we can really say on that topic, unless you can think of any other apps, Paul, that you've used or anything like that.
No, I was going to ask you about GPS tracks, because we mentioned that as an app of the day a little while back, and you'd said that you used it a lot. I'd only used it because I can then export the data to import into Lightroom to combine with my DSLR pictures, so that I can get GPS data assigned to the DSLRs, which works really nicely. I don't use it a lot, but it's pretty slick that way. But that does bring up another question. One of the nice things about having a dedicated GPS unit is being able to drop points too as you go, not just record the track, but also say, hey, something here, and tag it. Are we able to do that with these various apps, GPS apps on the phones?
Yes. Now, I know with GPS tracks, you can just be running a track, and then there's a confusing. They have a very confusing interface that they don't explain very well. There's like this little arrow button that's pointed up and pointed down. That's basically like your pin dropping app, and you can just hit that and it'll drop a pin where you're standing, and then you can move that pin if you need to, or you can type into it, and then you can tap into it and then change the coordinates on it and just make it exact. We actually used GPS tracks on a project not too long ago to it was kind of I mean, we came back out later on with a Trimble because I was renting the Trimble. So we wanted to be able to come back out and find this stuff because we had to do this project over like several weekends because of access. So it was actually, I think, 5 different weekends over the course of like 6 months. And I don't own a Trimble, so I wasn't going to go rent one each time just so we could do a small section of this thing. So what we decided to do was we actually used GPS tracks to drop pins on where the artifacts were because we had to rebury them. They were found on a metal detector survey. So we reburied them, left a little bit of a clue for us as to exactly where it was. And then we didn't leave like a pin flag or anything because we were coming back, like I said, months later. And then we came back with a proper GPS using GPS tracks to walk the line that we were recording and then stop on the pin that we had recorded. And since we had the exact coordinates typed in, it was really easy to refine those artifacts, find their exact point, and then record them to a sub-meter level. But yeah, the short answer is yes, you can do that. Some of them are more clunky than others, and some of them don't actually allow you to do that. I don't have enough experience with Collector to tell you yes or no, but I know GPS tracks will allow you to do that. And my guess is PDF maps, Avenza PDF maps would not allow you to do that. It was basically kind of a bare bones, just like it does a few things, but it does them well kind of application. But if you really needed some high tech, really high powered stuff, it's not going to be the app for you. That being said, like I said, with GPS tracks, is one of its big downsides is it does too much and then crashes. So it's almost like a suite of apps that you need to do some sorts of things, which is bad and annoying. But then if you just understand that that's the world we live in, then I think it's kind of okay. If you I wish app developers would just focus on one thing that they do well rather than trying to stuff too much into an application. But who knows? Anyway, yeah, we're at the end of another segment. So
you want to tackle? I'm just curious with this one question here. Chuck has a question that's not a question. It says Trimble Data Dictionary. It sounds like it might be related to what we were just discussing. Do you know what this means?
I do know what this means, and it's a confusing thing for a lot of people. So a data dictionary on a Trimble, it's a certain file type, and you need like the certain program that comes with all this stuff to actually create a data dictionary. But I think in just my conversations with people, and to be fully honest, this is my initial understanding of it before anybody explained it to me or before I had to create one. I used to think a data dictionary was basically like, oh, we're going to have certain defined terms within the system that our company has decided we're going to call things this. And I was thinking of actual data and an actual dictionary, like words. But really what it is it's predefined point types that you can take, basically. So what I mean by that is if you just open a Trimble Rover file and you just start a new file to record stuff in, the only 3 options you're going to have to record are point, line, and polyline. Okay, so that's it. You have point, line, and polyline. But if you create a data dictionary, you can, and those lines are all going to be black too. Like the points will be black, though actually there'll be little X's. The lines will be black, and then the polylines will be black, and they're solid lines. There's nothing you can do about it. But if you create a data dictionary, you can have actually more stuff on the screen that says, oh, I'm recording a projectile point, and you can upload a little symbol, or you can create a little thing. You can have it be a different color. So when you create your data dictionary, you actually end up with a really full colored, already legend out map, that's got different things. Like if you want to use a dashed red line for your site boundary, you just choose site boundary, and you've already created that as your data dictionary to be a dashed red line. And then you can create that, and you basically makes it so you create less work for your GIS department later on by creating these very specific map types. That's all a data dictionary is, essentially. Yeah. So Chuck's other question, though, is going to be a longer conversation. Let's do that on the other side of the break.
Let's do that.
Yeah, we'll be back in a second. Hey, everybody, this is Chris Webster, and I wanted to tell you about our latest sponsor and supporter, WildNote. You've heard me talk about it on the Archaeotech podcast. You've heard me talk about it on other podcasts, but WildNote is basically your digital recording solution. Works on Android, works on iOS. You start on the web, on any browser, create your project, add your survey forms. You can create your own survey forms. You can modify ones from our survey library, upload those to the project, and then bring them over to your device, record all the information, send it back, export a PDF, an Excel pivot table, coming soon, probably a CSV file, any sort of export that you could possibly imagine, and it's all done for you. Go get your 30-day trial at wildnoteapp.com. The price starts at $50 a month, but comes down from there with annual pricing and volume pricing. So check it out, wildnoteapp.com. Okay, we're back for our final segment of episode 76, Your Technology Questions. Again, if you have any questions, send them to me. Email chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Tweet to @ArchaeoWebby, ARCHEO, or @Lugal. So send us those. Paul, Chuck has another question, and I think you're more apt to answer this, I guess, qualified to answer this than I am. Data file structures that are intuitive and useful. Not really a question, more of a statement. How do we create? Let me make that in the form of a question, Jeopardy style. How do we create digital file structures that are intuitive and useful? Or start off by saying what that even means.
Intuitive and useful. What I take that to mean is something that I've been hammering for decades now, is that if you're creating a file structure to record archaeological data, make it human readable. Don't use obscure codes that mean things if you can just use a word instead. I've actually, I'm not archaeological, but was dealing with some data about ethnicity of applicants to the school that I work, and the admissions department had been doing this for a long time, and they record things like AA for African American and LH for Latino Hispanic. But sometimes that's L/H. And if somebody identifies as both African American and Latino Hispanic, it's going to be AA/LH, unless it's LH/AA, or it's a problematic. As opposed to if they'd written it out, there would be no ambiguity, right? So I think the highest priority is, if you want your data to live beyond your project, beyond your software, if you want somebody 100 years from now to be able to go back and look at your data and be able to interpret it, is you have to absolutely make it human readable. And there are different ways about that. I mean, you can do that as a CSV. CSVs are pretty nicely structured, rows and columns. If you keep it clean and keep each column distinct and then each row distinct, you can do that quite nicely. If you want to get a more complex kind of data structure, the two big options are XML, which is really wordy, but it's nice in that it's very object oriented, and that you have objects and attributes, and that you can go and drill in on those attributes quite detailed. And you can also have a definition file that says, what kinds of attributes you can have, and can it only be one of this, or can it be multiple? Different things that matter on a database aspect. And again, it's human readable primarily. It doesn't have to be. People can screw up and make codes instead of attributes that have real names, but it I think helps. It facilitates thinking about your data as something that somebody might be able to go in and, without a computer, actually parse. And now the other part that's come up over the last 10 years or so, related to XML, much lighter though, is JSON, JSON, JavaScript object notation. And that's another kind of object-oriented way of displaying data. And things get nested, like tabbed, indented, as you go down objects and attributes of those attributes, and you can go on through like that. I would, if I were designing any software right now that had to write data, I would be looking very seriously at saving it as JSON, just because that is at the moment kind of the lingua franca amongst the internet programmer world. And if you save that as a straight out UTF-8 text file, you can use multiple different scripts in it. You can save it out, read it with anything, and somebody, again, an archaeologist 100 years from now, will be able to open that file and more or less reinterpret it without too much difficulty. So I think that digital file structures are intuitive and useful, means more than anything else, means human readable.
Archival,
yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Archival I think defining the word archival from a digital data standpoint is something people need to wrap their heads around. Something I had to wrap my head around, because archival usually means from a preservation standpoint, it basically means I don't want this to deteriorate over time, right? I mean, that's what archival technically just means. It means in 100 years, I want to see this in the quality it is now. And we typically think of data the same way, and we have to put it on things that actually won't deteriorate. If you saved all your data on zip disks 20 years ago, I hate to tell you, but it's probably gone. But and even CDs and DVDs, they are not permanent. They're starting to degrade.
If you save stuff on DVD 15 years ago, take a look at it now and move it to a different medium, please,
Right.
because you're going to lose
Exactly. So that is still a definition of archival, but I think we have to definitely consider with digital data the readability of the data. You might have put it on the best disk that you had, and it's this thing that will last for 1,000 years. But I'll tell you what, in 500 years, if nobody can read it, who cares if it exists at all? If it's actually unreadable, it's you could look at it like a new language somebody would have to learn, in 500 years, because it was written in this language, this programming language that has just been lost to time. We've moved on from that. So if you, like Paul said, have it exported and saved in its final format, sure, put on the special file formats for whatever program you want to read it with, but also include a file that's just got a human readable, text style file that probably anything in through time will be able to read. That's what I would say. That's got to be part of the archival conversation. I don't know if we exactly talked about what Chuck wanted, but that's where we went with it.
Well, it wasn't a question, but it's it's a jumping off point for I think actually an entire discussion of its own. Digital file structures are intuitive and useful. I think yes, yeah, absolutely, whenever possible. I mean, the real trick is when you have binary data. Mm-hmm. Right. If you've got something from a sensor and it's not recorded as numbers that you can throw into CSV as columns and rows, then that's a whole nother can of worms. But basically, think of it. If you've got, you look through your old disks and you're going to find like an old Mac write file, and you might find an old RTF file. That Mac write file is hosed. There's nothing you can do with it anymore. Hope you saved it in some other format because it's gone. That RTF file, you can still open that. And you can still look at that. And I think that we have to consider that. And then since we're hot on the heels here of talking about GIS methods to record transects and also the Trimble Data Dictionary, I just wanted to quickly point out this one program that you may or may not be aware of. It's called GPS Babel. It's a translator for different GPS types files and GIS files. I've used it a lot in the past. I haven't had need for it in a number of years now, but it's still, I believe, under active development. And, you throw a Trimble file at it and spit out a KML. You throw a KML and you spit out a shape file. I used to use it. I had Magellan GPS data collectors for my for my data collection for my dissertation work, and I'd take the dumps from that and then run it through GPS Babel in order to get things I could map in Google Earth. Nice, very, very important, and that's another part of the whole question of longevity of your data is being able to translate it. Some point in the future using either built-in software of the program that created it, or else third-party program like GPS Babel in order to translate, but. If you have data that's in a binary format and it can be represented in text, I would definitely look at doing that. And so if that's something that you have that you can do with GPS Babel to make your data a little more archival, I definitely would look into it. And then, then there's the whole other question that I started with of if you're writing your own software, what do you think of in terms of your data structures and your file formats? And again, human readable.
Well, and I linked to it in the show notes, but GPS Babel's website looks like it was written about 15 years ago.
Yeah, it hasn't been updated
that being
since
said,
since I did that. Yeah.
So whether or not it'll run still remains to be seen, because it says it runs on Microsoft Windows XP, Vista, Windows 7, and Windows 8.
Pretty amazing, huh?
But it also says, Mac OS X and Linux. So, I don't know. We'll see. It'd be great if it does still run. It is open source development, and I don't know. Try it out.
It kind of came out of the Linux world, so there's really two parts to it. There's the command line part that runs by itself, and I think probably still does run on most platforms. And then there's the GUI front end, which is if there are going to be problems with it, that's where I'd expect them to be.
Right, probably. Okay, well, we only have a couple questions left and about 7 or 8 minutes left, so let's go to Silver's question, our final question on GIS, and there's an easy answer to this question. Any new software that could replace ArcGIS? And the one solid answer to that question is QGIS, otherwise known as Quantum GIS. I am constantly surprised by the number of people that don't know about QGIS. It does everything ArcGIS can do. Sure, there's some high end, like really high end things you can do with ArcGIS with their library linking and all this different stuff that maybe would be difficult or impossible with QGIS. But quite frankly, most of us just need to make maps, read maps, and do stuff with maps, right? So, and that being said, even if you're doing some of the other complicated things like view shed analysis and all that other stuff, you can get the scripts and the plugins and the programs and things like that to put into QGIS to actually do all those things. And most of the tools are very similar to ArcGIS. So if you already know how to use ArcGIS, but you want to save yourself $6,000 a year, then go download QGIS and your learning curve will be very short and you can go in there and use it. The only thing I didn't really like about QGIS when I first started using it was the map template feature, like actually creating a printable map. It really seemed not very intuitive, and they've done some improvements to this in the last couple of years. But that's one thing I really didn't like that much about it. But that being said, once I figured it out, I knew how to do it. So it's just a matter of figuring it out. And since it is open source software, there are thousands of tutorials on YouTube and other platforms on, if you want to know, don't type in how do I use QGIS. That's people who don't know how to use the internet. Type that in. Type in how do I draw a line with QGIS? How do I, update a point? How do I import a map? How do I georeference? How do I, be specific? And you'll probably find something that is very specific about that. So yeah, I don't know of any other solid GIS software that people are using other than ArcGIS and QGIS. If there's anything else out there, Paul, do you know of anything?
No, I haven't used ArcGIS enough, and I haven't used QGIS recently enough to really tell you a side-by-side comparison. But ArcGIS, the last time I used it was, as a young grad student, and then it was clunky and problematic. And I know it's definitely, it's a leader, it's a software leader for a reason. But I also believe that from what I've seen a lot of people do with it, they're using it just because it's the only thing they know of, and they know, and there's somebody at their school that knows it, and so they can teach them enough that they can use it. But it's kind of the same problem that you have with people who use Word all the time for all their word processing, when they could get away with something simpler, more straightforward in most of the time with fewer problems, actually, because Word is a bit of a beast and is prone to corrupting its own files, even now. Ask me how I know. Mm-hmm. Not saying that ArcGIS corrupts its own files, but the obvious answer is take a look at QGIS. It probably isn't as fully featured, but from what I've seen, it's pretty fully featured. I first was looking at QGIS when I was working on my dissertation. I was using GRASS, which is good, but very difficult and slow, and based off of some very, very now outmoded paradigms of how one uses a computer program. And that was just as QGIS was getting off the ground. And, I could see they had their head on straight, but it just wasn't fully featured enough for me to use my data that I had at the time in it to produce the stuff that I needed. And I had all sorts of recipes and stuff ready for me in GRASS that I'd already created, so I didn't want to have to go and reinvent everything while I was trying to write. But since then, QGIS has really taken off. It's got a big user community. And like you said, there are a lot of different tutorials out there. So if you're not, an ArcGIS jockey, take a look at it. If you are an ArcGIS jockey, take a look at it, because it might be, a simpler way of doing what you need to do. But again, I can't compare that. I can't speak from comparing them side by side, because I haven't used them like that recently enough to really know.
Okay. Well, if I'm curious to know if there are any other, GIS alternatives out there. Probably open source would be my guess out there. If you do, let us know. Let us know in the comments. So we have one final question, and that is from Stuart. And I have a very short answer for him. He says, can a drone not do my job for me by now? I'd rather stay in bed. My answer is yes, Stuart. A drone can definitely do your job. Oh, man. Stuart, I hope you're listening to this. Anyway, the longer answer to that is no. A drone can't fully replace the job of a field technician or crew chief or anything like that just yet. However, drones are starting to replace certain tasks that we can do, or they're not starting to replace. They can. I don't think anybody's actually doing it regularly in practice where it's just like part of the conversation. But drones can definitely take pictures, take site overviews. I mean, the fact that you can stick a $1,200 drone in your backpack in a tiny little case, and I'm talking about the Mavic Pro or even the Mavic Air, the fact that you can do that, throw it up, use about 2 minutes of its battery life of the 20 minutes that you get, and then throw it back in your backpack and get some really amazing photography and georeferenced photography. That's just phenomenal to me. The fact that you can have a pre-programmed flight path that says, I want to go in a spiraling outside pattern and then flip around 180 degrees and come spiraling back in, taking photographs the entire way and turn that into a 3D model later on. And while it's doing that, you're just working on the ground, because with structure from motion, as we found out, you could have people moving around on the ground and doing different things while the drone's taking its photographs. And you're probably not going to be in the model because you're moving and the drone is moving, and it's not recording things that are moving. It's only recording things. The software is recording things that are static. So it's pretty crazy that we can do that. And I've had lots of conversations with the people about the final piece of the puzzle here, which is basically drones doing survey. I still think that is a viable alternative. I think drones can do survey, and you can have people look at the images and then send crews out to just where the hits were, not to go out and survey 30,000 acres and only find 2,000 acres worth of stuff, but survey 30,000 acres to 100% completion, not the 5 or 10% completion we're lucky to get on a 30-meter interval survey. Survey 100% of it in a very small fraction of time, and then just send archaeologists to the hit points that were discovered either via software or via somebody simply just looking at the footage. So the answer, Stuart, is no, not yet, but I really think that it's coming down the line, especially as competition gets heavier and heavier for projects. Anything that gives people market advantage is gonna win them a contract, and these bigger companies are smart enough to know that, and they're going to be developing these sorts of things to be able to do that and save money. So, yeah. So, Paul, anything on are drones taking your job?
You mean fixing computers that people have spilled their tea into? No, I don't think so. Not yet.
Sounds like something a robot can do, though.
Telling people to restart their computers, every now and then when things start not working right. Yeah,
well, I think computers are going to be disposable at some point. Like if you spill something on it, like your data's in the cloud, you simply just throw your computer in the recycling bin next to you, and you 3D print a new one while you're at lunch, and you're done. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, why fix them at some point? They'll just be completely disposable, 100% recyclable, and no data stored on it. That's where I think we're headed, and I don't think it's going to take too long to get there.
Well, we're partially there with the Google Chromebooks, rather.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, you can get one of those for like $150. Yeah. I want to talk real fast in the last, we have no time left, but I just got to mention this because it's kind of interesting. I don't know if anybody listens to the Pitch. It's a podcast on Gimlet, and just look for the Pitch. Just type it in your podcast player. But basically, they bring on. I think they've got a set group. It's kind of like Shark Tank, but for podcasting. They're in fact, it's exactly like Shark Tank, except for podcast. And people can apply to be on the Pitch, but there was a company that came on last November, and that's November 2017. As you're listening to this, and it was a company called Qleek. QLEEK, and their website is qleek.me. And they were kind of trying to bring back record and CD sharing, like people sharing and gifting and doing things like that, but in a more digital media way. And it's kind of I took my entire CD collection and digitized and got rid of it. I was never really tied to that kind of thing. But this, for some reason, hits my technological, emotional, sensors and says, wow, I kind of like the idea of this thing. Basically, there's a little player and you have this little hexagon-shaped kind of wooden disc, but there's electronics inside of it. And that little wooden disc kind of thing is the album. It's an entire album. You can have put on it whatever you want. You buy this thing, it's got the digital music on it, and you can physically hand that to somebody, and they just simply drop it on top of this little Qleek player thing, and it senses that it's there and starts playing music. And then they've got this hive thing, they call it. It's like this hexagon thing. You buy these You buy these holders to kind of hold them on the wall, and they've got their own designs on them. And it's just the idea of being able to display stuff like that and then to pull it down and drop it into a little player and then maybe to gift it and hand it to somebody. I don't know. It kind of fits for me, even though I'm all techie and I don't want things. I just kind of like it. And I had to mention it. It's just a weird kind of unique thing. They're having a problem with funding right now because they weren't actually successful on the pitch, but then they ended up getting some other funders to come in and get them going. They're having a problem with the players manufacturing those. They need a lot of money to manufacture the players, so they're actually back ordered on their website as we're talking here in mid-March of 2018. So anyway, it has nothing to do with technology and archaeology. I just wanted to mention it because archaeologists like albums and things like that, and I thought this was kind of a neat little thing, so I thought I'd bring it up. Anyway, I don't think I have anything else. Paul, you got anything else to wrap up this podcast?
No, I really enjoyed doing this. We have to do it again. Take listener questions rather, and discuss them a bit because they have some great questions. A lot of grist for the mill, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. We can't be sitting up here in our ivory podcast tower thinking we know what you guys want to know about. So definitely let us know, and we'll try to muddle our way through it. And especially if you have a guest that you'd like us to bring on or something like that. Maybe you're the guest. Maybe you're the expert and you want to talk about what you've been doing that was cool with tech or something you've been doing. So, we'll bring you on and we'll chat about it.
I'm really curious to hear from somebody just even if they don't have something fully fleshed out, but if they're working on an idea, that involves tech and archaeology, I think that it's worthwhile to hear it and discuss it and try to, pick it apart a little bit. If you have something that you're working on, a program, hardware, software, doesn't matter, a new technique of using existing equipment, I'd love to hear it. We'd love to discuss it here.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right. Well, thanks a lot, Paul. Thanks a lot for coming on the show and answering all these questions.
Thanks, Chris. Always fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, send us in your questions and comments. We'll see you next time.
Bye. Thanks for listening to the Archaeotech Podcast. Links to items mentioned on the show are in the show notes at www.arcpodnet.com/archaeotech. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com and paul@lugal.com. Support the show by becoming a member at arcpodnet.com/members. The music is a song called Off-Road and is license free from Apple. Thanks for listening.
This show is produced and recorded by the Archaeology Podcast Network, Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, in Reno, Nevada, at the Reno Collective.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.arcpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 US a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to arcpodnet.com/members for more info.